This is a very big day in politics and, of course, in money. We have the market rally going on right now. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high earlier today. The Dow at this moment remains with a triple-digit gain. More on your money in just one moment. We begin with President Trump and the FBI. Joining us now, Karl Rove and also Rove London. First to you, Karl Rove. I'm sure you saw that speech there to the FBI. The president refrained from bashing McCabe or Comey or anybody else and simply praised the graduates. I think he did the right thing. Right thing,
absolutely. That was not the moment to say and do those things. Okay. Those will be litigated in other venues and other ways.
Okay, now, I came on strong, you just heard me, and I've been doing it for a week.
It's rare that you come on strong.
I'll take that as a compliment. I think there is a cabal of Trump haters within the bureaucracy, and they move deliberately to skew the election. That's what I think.
Well, I think you're right that I wouldn't say a cabal. There are key actors in this drama who clearly had animosity towards Trump. The interesting thing to me is when Mueller got evidence of it in July, he did something extraordinary, which was immediately fire struck. Think about it. This guy was one of the top investigators inside the department. Mueller gets these emails, which are a result of an inspector general investigation into inappropriate behavior between Strzok and the woman attorney agent. And what is the first thing Mueller does? He fires him. He gets, quote, demoted to human resources. How humiliating is that? Hard to remove any federal employee, but he effectively ended this man's career in the FBI, and he should have.
Okay. Herb London. Again, I came on strong. I'm calling it a cabal of plotters inside the administration hating Trump. And you say?
I say this is a coup d'etat. I think there are people who have arrogated to themselves the authority to make a decision about who the president of the United States should be. This is a part of an anti-Trump rally. It's a rally within the FBI and other agencies to make sure that Trump was not elected president of the United States. This is an animosity that goes very deep into the culture. It's a culture that clearly suggested this man should not be president of America, notwithstanding the attitude of the voters. And so I do think that it's a very serious matter.
Okay. Karl Rove, we all want to get to the bottom of this. We all want the truth to come out. Does that mean we have to investigate the investigators?
I'm not of that opinion now. Look, I think Mueller's actions tend to reinforce my sense of his credibility. He didn't hide this. He fired him. Now, he should have been more forthcoming to Congress about the documents. And look, I want to be clear. I think the vast majority of the FBI agents are professional and do their job.
Yes, indeed.
So this is a small group of people who had the levers of power, McCabe, Strzok, Page. But I think we got to be careful about castigating the entire agency.
Absolutely.
And undermining, because I do think they've got people there that they're sure everybody's entitled to a political opinion, but they were doing their job. Strzok had a political opinion and acted in an entirely inappropriate way, and it didn't work. If they were going to try and have a coup d'etat in this election, he wasn't able to pull off. What was his insurance policy? He wasn't able to purchase one.
One real fast. Matt Gaetz, Republican, Florida, House member. He told us earlier that they are going to drag Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and put them under oath in front of Congress and have them testify.
They should.
They should indeed.
Congress is responsible for the oversight of the executive branch, and I used to have a place in his district. He's a good conservative Republican from the Panhandle of Florida.
Okay. I know that. Karl, Herb, stay there, please. Got more for you in a second. I want to move on to taxes. Looks like some progress on the issue that has Senator Rubio very concerned. That's the family tax credit. Blake Berman at the White House. What do you have for us, Blake?
Well, this information, Stuart, comes from Congresswoman Kristi Noem. She is one of those House Republican tax negotiators, and she says the refundable portion of the child tax credit, which is the concern right now of Senator Marco Rubio, will be raised up to $1,400. Rubio's objection was that it was only at $1,100 or 55% of the overall $2,000 batch. Moving that up to $1,400 would appear to ease some of Rubio's concerns, though we have not yet heard from him directly as to how he views this latest move. Here at the White House earlier today, President Trump was complimentary of both Rubio and Senator Lee. This has been a big issue for them, and he was asked about movement on the child tax credit. Here he was.
A child tax credit, just so you understand, the Democrats have done nothing in terms of children, in terms of child tax credit. We're putting in a tremendous child tax credit, and it is increasing on a daily basis.
And yesterday, Stuart, the president did not seem too concerned about the concerns of Marco Rubio. Now it is moving back toward the direction that Rubio wants to see it.
I got you, Blake. Thank you very much indeed. That is breaking news indeed. Karl Rove, looks like some of the concerns of Senator Rubio have been addressed on the child tax credit. Looks like, therefore, the deal is a yes.
Look, at the end of the day, he was going to vote for it. The question is, how quickly were they going to be able to vote for it? Yesterday, he was talking about $80 billion fix. That would be close to requiring a one point increase in the corporate tax credit to pay for it. Let's see what this solution is. I bet you a dime to a dollar it's considerably less than $80 billion. I talked to several of the people involved in the process last night from the Senate side. They were very confident that they'd be able to arrive at a comfortable arrangement, but it ain't going to leave them particularly happy and warm and fuzzy as they go into Christmas. There are not going to be a lot of presents under the trees of Rubio and Lee from a lot of their colleagues because they think they've already spent that money on increasing the child tax credit.
Herb London, though, if they get something, and Blake Berman refers, they're going to get something.
There's no question.
They can't turn around and say, no, it's not enough. The whole deal's off.
Right. And keep in mind, Rubio never identified a number.
He didn't.
And so because he didn't identify a number, you go to 1,100, 1,400, it'll satisfy him. So there's no question this is going to go through. I think that Karl is absolutely right. The 1% clearly was designed to create an environment that would allow for this kind of increase to occur. Now it's going to occur. Rubio and Lee will be satisfied. I'm a bit concerned about what happens to the coals that are thrown under the chimney of those two guys, because they are not exactly popular figures within the Senate at the moment.
But if they vote yes...
Even so, they're not going to be that...
Christmas spirit.
Not that popular. Not that popular.